prior experience in investing in biologics or in investing in products that interact with the immune system. So they typically are characterized by the fact that they understand the reality. They understand all the technical aspects related to the nature of the active ingredients, what it means in terms of characterization, manufacturing processes, the complexity of the controls, of the quality controls. They also understand the pathway to move from preclinical to clinical and to convince the authorities. And oftentimes they have a good understanding of the fact that you're essentially looking at, generally speaking, relatively long timelines. It's only in the context of a pandemic like the coronavirus one that we are seeing an accelerated path to market. Mind you, in the history of vaccines, 2 vaccines have been developed in short time. Decades ago, the mumps vaccine was developed, I think, in 4 years. And more recently, the Ebola vaccine was developed in 3.5 years. So it is not, I would say, the rule that vaccine development is long, but it is the norm because of the complex nature of the technology and because of the burden of evidence that the companies have to generate to prove the value of their asset.
Yeah, because in biotech books, those companies are divided in 3 groups or even more 4 groups. The first one is the giants like Amgen, Genentech, that they have all of the facilities, all of the expertise to produce whatever they like. The second group is those who are focused on the product innovation, as you mentioned. The third group is those who have access to tools and platforms, technology platforms. And the fourth group is hybrid, those who have both product and the initiation to a new product and also to technology. So I think it is probably close to first one, but the first one they can control every member of their supply chain, the value chain, the first one. So one of the question is, why a big giant like Amgen, they haven't yet sent to the market a COVID vaccine candidate, not yet, and it comes mostly from the smaller ones,
Well, first of all, I wouldn't qualify Amgen as a vaccine company. It's a company that has knowledge with biologics, but essentially monoclonal antibodies, right? And the kind of technology that you use to produce monoclonal antibodies is, cultivating suspension cells that produce monoclonal antibodies is, to my knowledge, not used routinely to produce vaccines. So the companies that had an edge in the current coronavirus epidemic or pandemic rather, they leveraged their command of a technology which was giving the possibility to produce fast an antigen, something that was actually reproducing the immune response that you get with the spike protein of the virus. And when you look at those with the fast response time, this is where you find RNA. This is where you find viral vectors. This is where you find also protein expression systems. Right? Of course, the companies that do not have access to those modern technologies, what did they do? They worked on the basis of the technologies that they know best, because they know them best, they know how to develop a candidate and they know how to scale up. Because mind you, it's one thing to know how to manufacture something at a certain scale. It's another thing to grow it, to produce billions of doses. So, and this explains the landscape that you see today with the coronavirus vaccine field, if you will, where you have a complete rainbow from ancient and time-tested technologies all the way to more modern technologies. Having said this, it is important to bear in mind that viral vectors and even RNA, even though they're relatively new from the regulatory perspective or from the perspective of a marketed product, they're not new from the R&D perspective. Those technologies have been in the making for quite some time. I think RNA, it's about 10 years. Viral vectors, it's more than this. So I think the point is, it is possible that those products look like they're new and therefore untested to the lay public. The reality is that the possibility of accelerating in the current situation is also resting on years of understanding of the technology, okay, at a smaller scale and maybe with different targets, but still understanding the intimate mechanisms of the technology and how to generate a credible product. So again, long answer to your question, but it's a matter of knowledge of a certain technology, agility with that technology, from the I would say the company's perspective, but also versatility of the technology. Is the technology lending itself to addressing different targets?
Okay, so it makes it a little bit scary because we hear that, because the governments, the states, they want to accelerate the access to vaccine, they will use the factories, manufacturing, facilities in other countries, let's say in China, India, I do not know, somewhere in Asia, I did not remember the name of the country. So do they have really the expertise and experience, to manufacture mRNA vaccine, or the other one? Is it possible?
By definition, when you intend to perform a technology transfer, you start by identifying or pre-selecting partners that have at least the foundational capabilities in terms of hardware, in terms of personnel to host the technology transfer. And on the basis of those profiling criteria, you essentially shortlist partners. And for each of them, typically what you do is you do a so-called gap analysis, meaning you know exactly what your standard operating procedures are and what are the requirements in terms of hardware, in terms of quality, in terms of utilities, and so on and so forth. And you essentially perform a gap analysis, meaning what is in place at the potential partner's facility? What is it that we need to train them to do? What is the equipment that they need to purchase, and etc. And so this activity, identification of the gaps, filling the gaps, and training the people to operate properly constitutes the technology transfer. So to your question, yes, it is perfectly possible to transfer. You do have, even in emerging countries, you have very capable teams, especially when it comes to vaccine. I mean, there are countries where you have a very robust tradition of vaccine production with large manufacturing sites, very skilled people operating under the purview of pretty strict regulatory authorities. So I mean, take the countries, the likes of of course, I'm not even mentioning China. China is not an emerging country anymore.
Brazil.
Yeah, so countries like Brazil or like India would definitely qualify. So I think the point is also, why do you need to tech transfer? Because the approach to vaccine manufacturing in the past has been largely following a principle of concentration of the number of manufacturing sites, meaning have few sites with large capacity, and you could potentially supply the whole world from that site, which for vaccines that have very predictable demand and limited risk of flare-ups of demand, like in the pandemic, is probably a cost-effective solution. But the reality is that when you want to face a pandemic and there's a need to provide a medical service, in the case of vaccine, and to provide it in large quantities pretty much simultaneously around the world, having a limited number of manufacturing sites is a bottleneck. And that's what we're experiencing today. It's a combination of having few manufacturing sites and sites that were not yet ready to perform a large scale production. So scale up was not done. And typically in vaccine development, you don't invest in scale up until you know if you have a product. So you start scaling up, investing in manufacturing capacity when you have solid phase 2 results. So what we're seeing today is the ramping up of the production capacity, which was decided when the phase 2 results were good, but this doesn't happen overnight. You have capital to be invested, you have equipment to buy. Some of those equipments are not available on the shelf. They have to be manufactured in a custom tailored manner. And this is not also happening very quickly. Once they're in place, they need to be qualified. You have, regulatory inspections from the authorities and so on and so forth. So all those processes take time.
Sure. So do you think that Europe does not really have the capacity to produce enough vaccine, at least for Europeans now?
Well, Europe has a lot of facilities. The European vaccine industry that exists today is essentially the result of successive mergers, and each of the companies had its own facility. So some of them may not be recent, but all the equipment that's in there is up to date, and when it is in use, by definition, it is functioning per the good manufacturing practices, under the purview of the European Medical Agency. So it's not that we're lacking facilities or that we're lacking people, but we may lack empty facilities ready to function, which is a different notion.
Okay.
And this is why, approaching, this has always been the difficulty in approaching supply for a pandemic. If the pandemic was influenza, right? Mm-hmm. You have one solution because you do have influenza vaccine manufacturing routinely, okay? So you would use those capabilities differently, but at least you already know how to manufacture the vaccine for that pathogen. If the pathogen is completely new, as in the case of the coronavirus, essentially all the work that had to be done on the preclinical and clinical development, in a way, has also to be done on the manufacturing side to make sure that you have processes that are sturdy enough, reliable, consistent, that can be scaled up, and etc. And this takes time and energy. So there's a lot more thinking, to conclude on this point, a lot more thinking that is currently being done about what would be the relevant manufacturing footprint to address future pandemics. And an idea which is gaining momentum is, instead of having a small number of large sites, is to have a larger number of smaller sites around the world, close to where essentially the doses are needed. So you would have all those sites operating simultaneously. But of course, in order to maintain the knowledge of the people working there and the activity of those sites and the level of quality current, you would have to find ways to keeping them at work during the inter-pandemic period to produce other vaccines or other biologics, so that when a pandemic comes, you would discontinue the routine activities and dedicate the facility entirely to the production of the vaccine against a new pathogen. And then you would actually be able to do this also because you would have people, staff in the factories with knowledge of the various stages of the manufacturing process, ranging from fermentation, purification, formulation, etc.
Mhm. Yeah, but it seems that it's at least, as you mentioned, because it requires knowledge and understanding, deep understanding of the new technologies, especially new technologies. Probably in near future there will be other technologies. We do not know other vaccines who will enter into the
Possibly.
market. Yeah. So, and when you were discussing this, I was thinking that I have read several articles, probably you have seen them, the need of the let's say poor countries to be, vaccination can never be successful here in Europe or in US or the rest of the world if the poor countries are not vaccinated. So we all need the vaccine, at global level. So if, let's say, Europe wants to just transfer the technology into some other countries, to use their knowledge, expertise, etc., they would like to produce for themselves, not for Europe. I think that each country nowadays, they need their own vaccines, for their own population. So let's say if it was in Kazakhstan or another small country, that I heard there will be a company who will produce the COVID vaccine. It's a very small country, they need the vaccination for their own population. I do not know if it's for charity, for helping those countries that they just send the production into those countries, or it's because, as you mentioned, because of the supply chain considerations, and because the facilities are not available right now in Europe, that they send the manufacturing to those countries. And I wonder if Kazakhstan or in another small country, they have enough experience about producing mRNA vaccine. Even in Belgium, I think it was 2 months ago, you have read it in the newspaper for sure, that there has been a technical problem in the factory, Pfizer factory in Belgium, and they stopped production for a while. And then, they repaired. I do not know if it came from machinery or it was related to technology or something else. So it's not that easy in my view, I think it is very optimistic to think that, you can just transfer that new technology and everything will be okay, and the quality will be perfect and everybody can receive the vaccination at the end of the next month. So I think it is probably too ambitious.
Okay, well, there are several points in your long question. First of all, I'm not aware of Kazakhstan, and maybe it's Kazakhstan, but I'm not aware of it. I think the first point is critical mass. What is the volume demand, and does it justify the setup of a manufacturing site? Because a manufacturing site is a combination of things. It's buildings, it's utilities, it's electricity, it's air conditioning, it's water for injection, and so on and so forth. So this is why typically it is always preferable, if you want to execute a technology transfer relatively fast, to transfer to a site which is essentially a platform where you already have the utilities, where you already have personnel that has some kind of experience which could be relevant. Of course, it will not be experience on that specific standard operating procedure. That goes without saying. But it is experience which could be relevant nonetheless, because once you're, for instance, capable of doing aseptic formulation, irrespective of the formulation, almost, bar some containment measures, the process remains essentially the same. The downstream part, filling in vials or in syringes, packaging, cold chain, again, bar specific requirements, it remains relatively the same. So typically, where you encounter difficulties is more on the primary manufacturing part, when you manufacture the active ingredient, because it could be a new technology, a new type of cells, a new type of growth media, a new type of enzymes in the case of the oligonucleotides. Um, uh, and it could be associated to this also different type of assays for the quality control. So those things could potentially be a bit trickier and require a bit more time for the tech transfer and training. Now, the last part of your question was about how can you be sure of the quality once the tech transfer is being done. Well, this is where actually all the quality control assays that you place, and actually are the sort of checkpoints, if you're the checklist of quality for a given product, and all the quality assurance procedures that wrap the whole activity come into play, and this is why there's so much testing being made. I mean, vaccines that are manufactured, they wait into a quarantine area in a cold chamber until the quality control is finished, and they're not moving into airplanes or wherever until they're released and certified as being consistent with the specifications. So if the procedures are applied properly, there's no reason to believe that the vaccine could be of a lesser quality if it was manufactured in a middle income country or in Europe. This is the health economy, the social, the financial economic status of the country will not be the driver of the quality of the product. It's the quality of the operations, the quality of the quality assurance that actually drives the end result.
Okay. So, okay, I cannot ask you, how long all this will take. I think nobody knows how long it will take.
No, I can tell you, it's again, there's a direct correlation between the time it takes and the magnitude of the gap.
Okay.
So if you're the absolute longest is you buy a piece of land and you build a factory on top of it. Okay, it takes years. Okay, and then the shortest possible time is you transfer to an existing site where you have personnel having knowledge about vaccine manufacturing, and where there is available space, manufacturing suites, and available equipment that can be used or repurposed for that specific reason. And then, of course, that shrinks the technology transfer schedule. But I would say, starting from a facility that has right capabilities, trained personnel, and that works closely with the authorities to make sure that the process is progressing in a smooth manner, you can do a tech transfer in 3 months.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, is Switzerland right now is manufacturing vaccine for COVID right now? Are you aware that if there are factories that are manufacturing?
I am not particularly aware of any vaccine manufacturing on Swiss soil. I know that there's a company that is involved in the sterilization of vials for the COVID-19 vaccine. I know that a Chinese CDMO has recently purchased a manufacturing site in Switzerland where they want to do production of biologics. I think it's more for cell and gene therapy. But I'm not aware of any COVID-19 vaccine being manufactured in Switzerland.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is rather a more general question. Who are the key partners of a small vaccine company? By your experience, that some small vaccine companies, who can be called their key partners?
I guess it's a matter of maturity of the assets and what the startup company has to sell in inverted commas at the relatively early stage. The partners, of course, typically it starts from or it's a partnering with an academic center, which where the technology or some of the knowledge originates. And then along the way, typically because those companies do not have fully fledged organizations, they have to use a lot of outsourcing of services. So contract research organizations, contract development, contract manufacturing organizations. So there's a lot of outsourcing. And when the assets become a bit more mature, this is typically when partnering happens with larger players, knowing that it may be partnering, but it may be simply licensing out or an asset sale. So, but it is quite evident, and it is not specific to the field of vaccines. It's pretty much the same dynamic across healthcare startups.
Okay, so when we can say that a vaccine company has a credible project that can attract investment, to what extent they might be clear in their projects, and the outcome of the results, that they can claim for the investment.
Yeah. The simple answer is it depends.
Sure.
If no, if you're, it actually depends. It depends on the disease. It depends on the target. It depends on the technology. If you're developing something which is completely new target, and there's no reference, there's no commercialized vaccine. Okay. When you perform your like the coronavirus, when you perform your preclinical studies, you don't know what good looks like. So you can have a response in mice, in rats, in guinea pigs, in ferrets, in monkeys, whatever. All this is nice and well, and you have to do it. Check the immune response, check the safety, do the regulatory toxicology, possibly do a challenge study. But as we say in our world, mice lie. Right, you never know whether they tell you the truth. So what all you can do is assemble a credible body of preclinical evidence to obtain authorization to proceed to humans. The good news in the field of vaccines is actually preventative vaccines. You are actually administering the product in healthy people. So you have subjects, not patients, in the study. And so from the phase 1 onward, of course, you have a measurement of safety, but you have the beginning of a readout on efficacy because you start measuring an immune response. And again, if you don't know what the right level of immune response is, you have to proceed to a clinical efficacy study, which is what we're seeing, a very large number of subjects with clinical endpoints. So then typically, when is an asset becoming attractive? It depends on the appetite for risk for the big pharma or the big vaccine company that would actually want to partner for that asset. But I would argue that between phase 1 and phase 2 would be the right moment to actually make a move, knowing that there's still a risk. Okay, but if you're going after a target which is well known, and where you have the so-called correlates of protection, meaning we know what level of immune response is desirable to protect clinically a person against the pathogen, then you could possibly or conceivably have either an earlier deal in the development or maybe a deal with better terms, or both. And then, of course, if on top of it, you have animal models that are well recognized, then you could possibly coin a deal on the basis of preclinical data. So this is why it depends on the technology, it depends on the targets, on the pre-existing competitive landscape, and also it depends on the track record of the technology.
Okay, okay. So, and maybe I will ask you only one or two questions because I think that the time is just near to end. Yeah, yeah. Do you think that really? Do you think that the mentality of the investors probably by this good number of the COVID vaccines that are entering into the market, they're changing, and I think that probably the next big need will be a vaccination for cancer, because as far as I know, the mRNA technology has been used, to find a vaccine for cancer by BioNTech was working on that for 5 years. So maybe now by seeing the results, more investors will be attracted to invest in the companies to find a good vaccination for cancer. Do you think that it is something to do with the changing mentality of the investors?
I don't know that we could qualify this as a change of mentality. Certainly, an increase in the level of interest, but as far as change of mentality, I wouldn't say so, because uh, cancer immunotherapy has been studied quite extensively, and I think I remember seeing some number somewhere, like something like 70% of the projects in biotech are somehow related to oncology, and the vast majority is the field of biologics, globally speaking. So arguably, maybe not each and every of those projects can qualify as a vaccine, but I wouldn't say that the investors are devoid of experience when investing in the use of biologics in the field of cancer. So it may actually change how they regard the potential value creation of one technology against another. That it could possibly change a little bit the ranking in terms of risk reward. But I don't think it would dramatically change their focus. It will certainly only reinforce their focus on the use of biologics to find solutions against cancer.
Okay.